Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
All right, so I haven't had a chance to grade your exams yet. I'll probably get to that this weekend. Typically, weekends are my big grading times. Oh, thank you for asking, Oliver. I'm doing all right, actually. So we seem to be generally all feeling pretty well in my house. So thank you for asking. Yeah, related to that though, I should tell you, fun fact, I found out that if you're negative for COVID and people around you are positive, you actually get to quarantine for longer than they do because they have to check you 3 to 5 days after the other people's quarantine period ends. So that means not only this week, next week I'll have to be on Zoom, which sucks, I know, but we know how to make it work. We'll keep it interactive, we'll keep it fun. So thank you all for, again, bearing with me, supporting me, all that good stuff. I really appreciate all the emails y'all have sent me, reaching out and, you know, things, checking in on me in the chat and things like that. So I very much appreciate it. So I'm just checking people off. I'm also a little bit calling an audible today because I don't know how many of you have paid attention, but your topic for your project that you'll do, the poster project, is due today. And some of you may be having a little bit of panic right now. Please don't. I actually purposefully decided to redesign today around helping you get ready for that. And what we'll do during the second half of class will actually count as one of your in-class assignments, but also help you with your topic. So I tried to do a double whammy. What we're talking about this week is how to science. And part of How to Science is knowing how to do things like find proper sources, which we've done, but then also knowing how to cite them. So we're going to go over APA style today. I know for some of you who are juniors and seniors, you may have heard some of this before, but for those of you who are sophomores, this might be brand new to you. So I have a PowerPoint that I uploaded maybe an hour ago that I've prepared before. And I said, you know what, let me call an audible and let's do this today so that they are prepared for their topic. And also, again, just something good to learn in general as a psych major or a scientist is how to properly cite your sources. So my daughter is very energetic downstairs, so you might hear her yelling along with Cookie Monster in a Sesame Street video. So just enjoy the ambient sounds of preschool. Ariana, go ahead. Yeah, I'm not being able to hear you, so if you have anything, go ahead and just throw it in the chat. I've had this problem with a couple students where, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the Wi-Fi being slow on campus, but it's really hard to get Zoom to recognize your voice. So please use the chat in those scenarios. So looking ahead to our syllabus, thinking about our calendar coming up here. Again, if you have your copy, feel free to pull it out. I'm pulling mine out. So we are doing this sort of twist on How to Science today. I anticipate we'll be able to wrap up How to Science on Friday still. If not, we'll bleed it into Monday like we have some of our topics. Next week, we're going to do myths and misconceptions, which will help you conceptualize things a little better too. You did have a perusal due technically Friday. You know, just do it whenever, as we've done for everything else. One thing I'll say is with the perusals, some of them are multi-part. So make sure at the end of each perusal reading, you scroll down to the bottom on the first reading. And if there's another reading, there will be a little bar at the bottom that says this assignment has X more parts. So for this perusal 5, it is 2 more parts. So make sure you click and read the next readings as well. So for this week, you have one about open science, one about many labs working together. And then you also have one about the IRB. So I'm gonna try to make up an activity about the IRB for y'all for Friday as well too. Alrighty, so those are the big things. Then your next perusal isn't due till Monday. So again, time for us all to just take a breath, reset, and oh, all good, thank you. Good question, Debbie. There is a spot, and so let me actually share screen and I can show you that. There is a spot on Blackboard to turn in your topic. So let me show you where that is. I'm gonna go ahead and pull down the chat so I can see it when people have questions. So you go to final project poster on Blackboard, and there's a spot right here where you turn in your topic selection. So a brief description of the myth you'd like to measure and why, with at least 2 relevant references, which you can, if you haven't found already, you're going to find in class today. So again, no panicking. Hopefully this will be helpful. All right, any other questions about logistics of things coming up? So that is due at midnight. Again, if you need a little more time, that's okay. I'd recommend, again, making sure you're generally trying to stay on top of things, just because if not, all this work will back up at the end of the semester and you'll be overwhelmed. All righty, so I am gonna go ahead and turn on our captions. There's parts of this I'm gonna skim a little more than others. So I created this for a class that's a W class. So I really got into the nuances of APA style. So I'll skim some of the like inclusive language stuff. I certainly want to mention it. But what we'll focus on is things like citations and references. Alrighty, so general overview. in terms of where do I find this information. So the Purdue OWL is always good. They do have an updated version of their APA style guide that includes the 7th edition, which came out 2 or 3 years ago, I think. And this is what the APA manual looks like. You're not required to have it for this class. Let me turn off the blur. Hang on. There we go. You're not required to have it for this class. I think I didn't buy mine until I was in grad school, maybe. But certainly if you plan to go on in psychology, this might be a really nice thing to have. You can also buy a digital copy. I want to say it's like $20, somewhere in that range. So very helpful. As you can see, I have things tabbed that I always refer to. And I literally, you could see I reached to the shelf next to me. I just keep mine there. Because when I'm writing, I have to reference it sometimes. And when I'm writing reviews, sometimes I reference it and be like, so look at this on page, whatever of the manual. So mine is always close by. Again, you're not doing a paper for this class, but if you were, it's pretty standard in terms of 8.5 by 11 paper, typing things, 1-inch margins. Interestingly, again, don't really care about this as much for the poster, but APA now has recommended fonts, which they've never had before, and font sizes. So I'm a Times New Roman gal. A lot of people prefer Arial. It's fine, especially for your poster. But the big thing about the font is you want it to be very clearly legible, okay? All right, so here's the part I am going to skim a little. This is the part about bias-free language. This is something you might want to consider as you make your poster if you're talking about people in general. So I really do like that they are specifying how to refer to people. Next, yes, everyone has their favorite font, I think. So when you're referring to individuals or to people, you refer to them as women or men, or we're going to go over some of the other terms, not as females or males. We reserve that for animals that we discuss. Okay, so we try to give people embodiment and you know, autonomy, and so we name them as people, not just like a sex, right? Obviously, if you're like under a year, infant, but then 12 years or younger, we refer to people as children, girls, boys, transgender, child, etc. 13 to 17 tends to be the adolescent or young person. And then 18 or over, again, referring to them as adults, women, man, genderqueer adult, etc. Older adults you just refer to as adults. Again, notice this is 18 or over, not the elderly, right? That's really sort of condescending. So, you know, a proper way to refer to, let's say your sample size, your sample population would be, you know, individuals over 65. It would be adults over 65. Easy. For disability, we do try to use person first language typically. However, I really like that they say consult with advocacy groups, because different groups of people who identify as having certain disorders may want something different. So may want to be identified as a depressed person or a person with depression. I typically default to person first language. Again, yes, yeah, autism, you tend to use identity first. Other disorders are the same. However, we never leave the person out, right? So for someone with autism, we wouldn't refer to them as an autistic, right? Or someone with an eating disorder, we wouldn't refer to them as an anorexic, or we wouldn't refer to a depressed person as a depressive, right? I unfortunately have seen this language used in a textbook I'm using this semester, not in psychology. So I plan to write a very nicely worded, but educational email to the authors about that. So they have a nice distinguishing here between gender and sex. And they talk about gender identity and how to discuss that, which I really like. This is new. APA's never explicitly talked about this before. And they also talk about using people's names of their choice and using their pronouns that match their gender identity. I love that they don't call them preferred pronouns, because they're not the ones these folks just prefer. They are those people's pronouns, right? And so the default now in APA is the singular they. So if you're referring to a person and you don't explicitly know their gender, or you're referring to like a person in general, you use the singular they now. And for some people who are grammar sticklers, this seems to grate. However, you should know in the history of language, the singular they was used up until the mid 1800s. And then it was actually like British common law that started using the singular he for everything instead. So this idea that they can't be singular is fairly new, right? And so defaulting back to that, and again, especially when you don't know someone's gender identity or you're trying to refer to people in general, do that. I also love that they say avoiding terms that imply binaries, so not saying the opposite sex, right? Saying like another sex or another gender, or the way I often like to say it is something like people of any gender. They also really are taking into account racial and ethnic identity. This is an important distinction that even psychologists F up, to be perfectly honest. So ethnicity is really about the shared cultural characteristics. So for example, Latinx is an ethnicity that sort of transcends all of Central America, South America, the Caribbean, right? And these folks have shared languages, shared practices. You can be of Latinx ethnicity, but identify as a different race. So there are people, Afro-Cubans, for example, who identify as Black and Latinx. So that's an important distinction that, again, that psychology doesn't always get right. I see this used incorrectly. Admittedly, I've used it incorrectly in the past as well. You should capitalize terms. So Black, white, Native American, Indigenous peoples. Here again, you should use the name that that group of people prefers, right? So some people who are native to what is now the United States prefer to actually be called American Indian, which like feels weird to those of us who've been taught to call them Native Americans, but we should respect how they identify. If you go north of the border into Canada, a lot of the Indigenous folks like to be identified as First Nations peoples, which I love. I just love that descriptor because it's so accurate. So again, we want to say things like people of color or underrepresented groups. I like to say things like minoritized groups because that talks about what the culture does to them rather than them being a minority. Now, a lot of times you'll also see BIPOC, BIPOC, and that is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Okay. So again, Black or African American, Asian or Asian American, white or European American, right? White people also have a racial background. We tend to erase that. Again, for Indigenous peoples, choosing the term that they prefer. So if we were talking about, say, the Indigenous peoples of Australia and New Zealand, we might use Aboriginal peoples or Maori, which is their identification. Again, if we're talking about Native American, we might use that term, or we might use Navajo if we're talking specifically about that nation. If they're of Middle Eastern origin, we typically are going to use the country. Sometimes people are okay with Arab Americans. Typically, they want to identify, like I had a client once who very specifically identified as Egyptian from Cairo. Like that was a big deal. So you want to, again, use that. Latinx, you've probably heard me throw this term around. The X essentially means that it can be Latino, which is masculine, or Latina, which is feminine, or, you know, anything in between. Some people within the Latinx community do not prefer this term. And so again, if you were working with research participants, you'd want to talk to them about how they identify. For sexual orientation, you want to be aware that this is their sexual and emotional attraction to other people. You choose your partners, not your sexual orientation. I love that, right? We don't get to choose our sexual orientations, right? We don't get to choose who we're attracted to, but you choose your partners, right? Just because I'm straight doesn't mean I would be attracted to any man, right? And then they talk about things like sexual, demisexual, asexual, the direction of your attraction. The other important thing to know is that sexual orientation and gender identity are two separate things, right? People get them confused. So they have some of the terms here. Sometimes you see these as sex and gender or sexual and gender minorities. LGBTQ plus is a common one that I see used a lot now. But you shouldn't just say homosexuals. We try to, again, be more inclusive. Talking about socioeconomic status, you talk about their low or middle income, talk about the opportunity gap. And then an important thing to remember is just intersectionality. No person is one thing, right? So I happen to be a white, straight, cisgender woman who is temporarily able-bodied, for example. And so we want to report data for each group whenever possible. Again, not necessarily relevant for your poster, but just fun to know. All right, again, gonna skip through some of the stuff that y'all don't need to worry about for this because you're not writing a paper, and go to in-text citations. Okay, so there are no footnotes or endnotes in APA style. Instead, what you use are what are called parenthetical citations. So you use these for paraphrases or for quotes. Basically, anytime you have gotten some information from a source that's not your brain, you cite it in APA. So as you're reading the research articles, for example, that you're reading for our class or for other classes, you will see there are times where there's like a sentence and multiple citations for just one sentence, right? That's pretty typical. Most paragraphs will have at least one, if not, 10 citations. Basically what I tell people is if you're saying something more nuanced than the sky is blue, right? You need to be citing something. So this might be different than other things you've been taught in the past. In APA, we're always saying where we got that information from essentially as soon as possible. So sometimes you'll see a citation halfway through a sentence. Typically they are at the end of a sentence. So if there is a single author, and I think I used me as an example for all of these, just so you can kind of see some of these nuances. So like, this is my dissertation. This was just me, right? So I would cite this. So like, if I wanted to say Myers found that, I would say Myers in parentheses 2010 found that. Or if I just wanted to say, a sentence, social comparison is related to body dissatisfaction. Then at the end, I could say Myers, 2010. Here's the fun part. If I am citing myself or referring to a past one of my studies in something that I am submitting to for publication, I do have to cite myself in this way. It can feel really weird sometimes. All right, two authors. If I was going to say, Myers and Crowther found that, I could do it that way. Or again, it could be, there's this relationship that was found, and at the end of the sentence, Myers and Crowther and the date. Okay, so parentheticals, especially if you haven't used them previously, can feel a little intimidating, but in my opinion, they end up being a lot easier than footnotes or endnotes. Honestly, you don't have to worry about like doing all kinds of formatting in Word. You just type it into the body of the paper. Alrighty, this is new. Hang on just a second, I'm gonna mute while I blow my nose so y'all don't have to listen. All right, so this is new to APA version 7 style. And I actually like this change. So it used to be, it was like, if there's up to 6 authors, you do this, and then after 7, you do that. And now it's just anytime there are 3 or more authors, you just use the first author's name and then et al, which just means and everybody else, essentially. And so again, if I was going to say that Leahy et al found this, the reason I'm using this as an example is I was, I believe, 2nd or 3rd author on this. I don't get to include my name, even though I might want to, right? Because this is APA style. So it's just Trisha's name because she was first author. Or again, if you're doing parenthetical, just Leahy et al and then the date. The only exception to this would be if you have 2 publications from the same author from the same year that have different co-authors, you would do what's here. That's probably going to be pretty rare for a poster where you're only going to have 4 citations, but I do run into stuff like this sometimes. If it's the same authors from the same year, you just get to do, like, this would be Becker et al. And 2017A and 2017B. All right, sometimes you'll find things that are written by a group or a corporation or an organization. So for example, if you're going to cite the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM, you would have to cite the American Psychiatric Association because they print it. And then you introduce the abbreviation at that point in time, and then all subsequent times you just get to use the abbreviation. Again, being efficient, cutting down on things as much as you can. So same thing for your poster. If you were to reference something by the APA, the first time you would want to spell it out, again, either like the American Psychiatric Association says, or the DSM says blah, 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 and then American Psychiatric Association, APA 2013, could go that way. So sometimes, this is nice and confusing, in psychology, you will find books that might have an editor for the whole book, but then each chapter is written by a separate author. This is pretty common in academia in general, and I see a lot of this in psychology. In that case, you would cite the author of the chapter, not the editors of the book, because the author of the chapter is the person that actually wrote that. The editors of the book just sort of edited and put everything together, essentially. So like I have a chapter in a larger book edited by Smolek and Levine. Were you to cite that chapter by me, you wouldn't cite Smolek and Levine, you would cite Myers. So in psychology, in APA style, we try to rarely quote. We try to instead paraphrase. We don't want giant block quotes. Instead, we want to put things in our own words, and a lot of times we're going to be synthesizing things together. So one of the assignments we'll probably work on next week or the following will be synthesizing from the articles you'll find this week. So this is an example. So this is, I believe, from my master's thesis, maybe my dissertation, but this is a sentence I wrote. In fact, now it would be Silverstein et al. This is from a previous version of APA style, so apologies. So it, as Silverstein et al. Pointed out, a discrepancy between the ideal body type and the way women perceive and experience their own bodies is so common that it may be a normal part of the female experience. And so because this is very explicitly the way the authors phrased this, and I liked their phrasing, I quoted it. And so then you would include a page number. If you are citing more than one reference, you do it in alphabetical order, not in year order. So, so here you can see, even though the same Leahy et al. Piece we looked at on the previous slide was published later, it would go first because Trisha's last name comes before mine. Alrighty, so reference lists. This is another thing I'll be asking you to look at. And in fact, for your assignment today, you'll be looking at this. So this is a nice format for it. So with a single author, just going to be their last name and then their first initial, middle initial. Okay. Sometimes they just list their first initial. You would just use that then. The year it was published, the title of the publication. You know, in this case, this would be like a journal article title, the name of the journal it was published in, the volume number and issue number, the page numbers, and then you also include a specific link to the digital object identifier, or DOI. The DOI is a unique identifier for that particular article that if you put it in with this URL, will take you directly to that article on usually the publisher's page. So here is one I cited. Last name was Jones, first initial, second initial, DC, came out in 2004. So body image among adolescent girls and boys, you can see the B is capitalized, nothing else is until the subhead. And then the first letter is capitalized, nothing else is, unless it's a proper noun, right? Like if it was like body image among adolescent boys and girls in New York City, right? You could capitalize New York City. So here's the name of the journal. That should be italicized. Apologies, I think that was a conversion to Google Slides issue. Then the volume number, issue number. If there are two authors, you just use both their last names with an and %. You don't type out and then follow the exact same format for everything else. This is again a change. It used to be, I believe, up to 6 or 7 authors. You type them out. Now you have to go up to 20 authors. My joke about this is somewhere someone who was like 17th author on a lot of things. Yes, exactly, Debbie. Good grief. Really wanted their name in print. So now basically most articles you'll run into, you'll have to type out all the authors. If there are 21 or more authors, then you would list the first 19, use a points of ellipses, and then you list the last author. And the reason you always list the last author is the last author in studies where you have something really big, like 40 authors, is typically what we call the principal investigator. They're the person that designed that study. So that's why they get recognized, even when the 20 plus people don't. So, but yeah, that takes up a lot of time and space and is annoying, to be perfectly honest. All right, if for some reason you were citing a whole book, you just do the author or authors, the year, the title of the work, again, following that same format we just looked at, and then the publisher. And if the book has a DOI, use it. Not all books do. Again, here, sorry, is a typo. We don't put the location anymore. We used to. So if it is one of those chapters from an edited book where you can see like the book had these editors, but these were the authors of that specific chapter, you would cite them as if they were the authors of a journal article, the chapter title, and then you say in the editors, and you actually put in parentheses eds, and then the name of the book. If it has an edition, you indicate it here, the pages of the book that chapter is on, and the publisher. Guilford publishes a lot of therapy-related books, so they're a great resource. For this, you might run into online sources. I mean, I highly recommend, especially since we're talking about important sources, right, that you have at least 4 actual journal articles. But there might be, from a newspaper or from a website where you want to cite as like a bad example of your myth, right? And in that case, these tell you how to do it. And this is already posted on Blackboard, so you can refer back to this at any time. Alrighty, any questions about that? So again, fairly straightforward, but something that many of you probably haven't seen before. And I figured since this is sort of our intro to the major class now, it would be a nice time to cover this. All right, so let me first off zoom in so you can see what I'm doing, and then I will share the link to this in just a second. So this is the assignment I'm going to have you do for the next 20 minutes or so. So, and this works really well because you're all on some sort of electronic device to do this, right? So you should have access to Google Scholar and our library resources. So you're going to search for and provide notes about 2 articles on the psychological myth or controversy you would like to focus on for your project. Again, if you don't have one yet, you can kind of poke around and see what you want to do based on this. Describe what level of the scientific hierarchy it is and why. Remember, we had that on our exam. And then there's a chart below that you'll fill out. So some hints. I put the image right there for you to refer to. Try to use broad topics in your searches. So something like development would be too broad. That's an entire branch of psychology, right? But something like mother-child attachment would work. And again, you might need to do the quotes like Stephen Lice reminded us for. All right, so I put 4 spots on here. You only need to do 2 for the assignment, but I figured if you want to use this later to do the other 2 articles you need for your poster, go for it. Or if you want to include more, you can. So first you're gonna cite your study in APA style. I know it's gonna be weird looking because it's in a chart, but it's just gonna be easier for you to organize. Then you'll say what level of the hierarchy it is. What were the researchers trying to find out? How did they collect their data? What were their results? And what conclusions can be drawn? And then, what is particularly useful about this for your potential project? So there's a link to this on Blackboard too, but I'm gonna put it in the chat. And the link I'm gonna put in is going to prompt you to make a copy of it. And then you can save it to your own Google Drive. And then I will create a spot on Blackboard to submit this. And so I think I may have done that already. Let me check real quick. If I haven't, then I can create one. Nope, I did. Look at me go, being on top of things. Okay, so here's where you'll submit it. And again, the link is here again, if you'd like. So go ahead and for the next now 15-ish minutes, and you don't have to finish it now, you can go back to it later. And this doesn't really have a specific due date right now, right? But for these 15 minutes while I'm here to answer questions, go ahead, I'll stop share, and start searching for some articles. And if you get both and you fill out the chart and you're done, you can submit it and leave. If you need to take the whole time and then you still need to finish it later, that's okay. But again, the topic that's due today, you have to describe it and then give 2 sources. So now you'll have your 2 sources. Plus you'll get an extra 10 points just for doing this because it counts as one of your in-class assignments. So hopefully this is helpful. And yeah, you can either unmute or you can chat either publicly or privately with me. I'll go ahead and mute myself so y'all can concentrate, and I'll pause so that we don't have 15 minutes of silence on the recording. I see I've got some chats already, so I'm going to start answering